The DOGing is underway in South Florida. This week, Broward was among the first to get the state scrutiny of local government's state auditors, carrying off tens of thousands of documents looking for signs of waste or abuse. Broward's mayor was right here last week, essentially saying, okay, but now hold up a mirror, state.
When they decided to adopt DOGE for the state, I guess my first thought was they would do it like the federal government did. Federal government looked at they adopted DOGE, and then they examined themselves. They examined all their different departments. I thought the state would actually begin examining itself. That's, obviously that's not the case. They kind of leapfrogged what they were looking at.
The state dispatched auditors to several other local governments, and what most have in common, they were mostly Democratic elected leadership. So, should the state be DOGing itself? The governor talks about the tightest, most efficient state spending. Do the numbers actually show that? Jeff Kottkamp is vice president and about to be CEO at Florida Tax Watch, and you may remember him as Florida's lieutenant governor to Charlie Crist when Charlie Crist was a Republican. And Kottkamp zooming in with us from Tallahassee. Jeff Kottkamp, you haven't changed one bit. Great to have you.
Yeah, great to be with you.
So Florida Tax Watch, you get to lead this organization, this venerable, longtime organization, for the first time in 45 years, a new leader. Is that true?
It is true, and it's a great honor. It's one of the really iconic organizations in Florida. It's the leading voice for the taxpayers of Florida. When you talk about being a watchdog of government, promoting efficiency, and really Tax Watch was DOGE before DOGE was cool. So all of these discussions about how do we spend the taxpayer dollar in a more efficient way, in a productive way, keep taxes down. This is music to our ears. It's in our DNA. So I love this discussion.
We do too, and appreciate all that you do. So let me start a little bit broadly. The governor speaks a lot about his efficient government and his efficient budget. Again, all online, anybody can go look at it. And you come out with a turkey list after every budget, and this year was no different, $416 million worth of questionable line items. And in fact, the governor actually vetoed about the same number, same calculation of what he considered turkeys in the budget. But what do you make of Florida's budget? Is there a place where DOGE can turn its sights on the state itself?
Yeah, of course. And the governor's executive order directed every state agency to develop a DOGE team and look at efficiencies in state government. Also directed the same efforts both to the university and college system as well as local governments. But if there's two areas that really catch our attention at Florida Tax Watch, the first are member projects that are filed every year by members of the House and Senate. This year's budget had over 1,600 member projects with a price tag of over $2 billion. And as you noted, the governor vetoed a good portion of those, which made it again on our turkey list. But that's one area that has proliferated over the years. And, it's one thing if something's put in the budget that has a statewide impact, that's impacting people in South Florida the same ways, impacting people in Central Florida and North Florida. It's another if it's an entirely local effort, a local project that really doesn't benefit citizens statewide, and those are things that we would look at very closely.
I want to ask you about something very specific. Again, I'm sure it will not be a surprise to you, but a fairly large outcry over the expenditure of the detention center in the Everglades that they're calling Alligator Alcatraz. It is a almost $500 million project. A lot of the contracts are no-bid contracts on an emergency basis. And I just want to get your take on, if you've delved into that a lot, could not a judgment on the detention center itself, but on the expense of it and the expenditures of it, and might that project or the intention to detain and house migrants be done in a much more cost-effective manner?
Well, I think you raise a really good point, and it's not just for this project, and it's not just for state projects, but local projects as well. So if there is a circumstance where the governor has to exercise his or her emergency powers, then have an expenditure like this, then I think you at least have to have an audit after the fact to make sure the taxpayers got their money's worth. Now, on a larger scale, both at the statewide level and again at the local government level, we've got to make sure that any contract after a certain, and you can, it's a policy decision on what that threshold is, but at least you would think $1 million or more a contract should be competitively bid. There should be an open process and where everybody knows what's going on and everybody has a way to have, public comment and a fair opportunity for competitive bidding. That's something I can tell you at the local level, it's a problem. And at Tax Watch, we've been looking at that, and we would like to see far greater effort putting in to making sure if we're going to spend taxpayer dollars, we're doing it in a competitive process.
Have you delved into the numbers at all? I mean, just recently from what we could see, a lot of the records were online and then taken down, but there was a $22 million line item to remove waste from the facility. There are some of the contractors' employees who are being paid $187 an hour. Not that they may not be worth that, I don't know, but have you looked into any of that yet? I mean, this is being spent in real time.
Yeah, we have not, and I'm not sure anybody's had the time to really look into it in great detail. But as I said, since this was done under the emergency powers, then I think at least, some month down the road, there should be an accounting of this to make sure it's done properly. And if it isn't, make sure it isn't done again.
You know what it strikes me, and you probably know about this, in 2022, kind of the same concept. When the governor had a transport program, he was flying to the southern border, touching down in Florida, I suppose to make it a Florida component to what he was doing, and then taking migrants to Martha's Vineyard. There were about 50 Venezuelans and Colombians that were transported in this manner. And in hindsight, the calculations came out to be like $30,000 per migrant, and not to be glib about it, but that's a first class ticket on American. You could have done that more cheaply. So that there is hindsight there. Is that something that would concern Florida Tax Watch?
Well, don't want to get in business as necessarily second guessing the governor in an emergency situation, but it is something that I think it's appropriate to look in hindsight and say, was there, under the circumstance, was there a better deal for the taxpayers? That's fair game. That is something that interests. We haven't looked at it, to be honest with you, but we think that we should always be looking at it. Are the taxpayers of Florida getting the best deal here? If we're going to use their money, we've got to do it in an appropriate way. So, I think there are a couple of things that you should look at, in the post-game analysis, I guess, if you want to call it that. One, are we using emergency powers in each instance appropriately? Secondly, are the taxpayers getting their money's worth out of it? So these are all fair discussions and something we shouldn't be afraid of. We should absolutely, in the public sector, you've got to remember you're not spending your money. You're spending hard-earned money of the taxpayers, and it should always be done in a thoughtful, deliberate way and in the most cost-effective way.
Do you, there's a lot of talk about tariffs, and I read something that Florida Tax Watch actually did some calculations on, this is kind of a subject switch, sorry, how the tariffs, which go into effect in the coming weeks, we believe, unless there's a change, specifically are going to affect Floridians.
Well, I think that in many respects, this is a moving target. I think when President Trump initially imposed these tariffs, there was an overreaction in a negative way without really understanding how this is going to unfold. It's obvious he's using this as a negotiating tactic. And so we did look at least in the short term, it was going to impact prices that people in Florida would be paying for particular goods. Now, we're already seeing this amazing surplus of money coming in from tariffs And there's even a discussion now about sending taxpayers a check because of this excess tariff money. Who knows how this is going to land, but it does look like over time that this is effectively bringing some order to the tariff game internationally. So it's going to be fun to watch how it ends up. But I think the long term will be a fairer playing field for American goods, which means in the long term, I think the citizens of Florida, the consumers of Florida will benefit.
And the calculation of costing about $2,000 a year more per Floridian for whatever that may or may not be worth, is that a number that you find valid?
Well, I think it was valid at the snapshot in time that we looked at it, and that's the problem with trying to pin this down because it is a moving target. It is ongoing negotiations. I think subsequent to our report, we had the deal with the EU at 15%. We've had a deal with Japan now. So it's continually evolving, and it's really fascinating to watch. It's like watching this, chess match. And I think it's going to take a full year to really accurately say how this is going to come out. But in that snapshot in time, I think the numbers were right.
Jeff Kottkamp, appreciate what you and Florida Tax Watch do, and hope you'll be in touch with us now that you're starting your CEO tenure.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be with you, and keep up the great work. Appreciate the hard work.
Appreciate that. Thanks so much.